Hello, everyone. You're listening to The Retail Tales, a podcast show where we exclusively discuss all things AI across the retail value chain. A podcast show which is exclusively meant for retailers and retail enthusiasts. I am Saurabh, and I'm your host for this podcast. Let me set the scene for today's episode first. You're up in the air, cruising at 35,000 feet on a cross-country flight. You've settled into your seat on a Boeing 737, the steady hum of engines and soft lighting making everything feel cozy and relaxed. What if, in this setting, you find yourself seated next to someone who you'd eventually have an absolutely interesting conversation with? A chance meeting completely leading to something which was anything but ordinary. Well, this is exactly what happened a few weeks ago with me. And I'm going to start this episode by sharing that experience with you all. I was taking a flight from New York to Portland, and, thankfully I got upgraded to business class, which I was super stoked about because that it's a 6-hour flight. Since I'm more of a United guy, so getting upgraded on this Delta flight was kind of pleasantly surprising. So when I boarded the plane and as I eventually took my seat on that flight, I found myself seated next to a very unassuming sort of guy. He was very simple looking, was wearing a hat and a pair of glasses, must be in mid to late 50s. He had a book in his hand. It was hooked by Nero Royale, which I happen to recognize instantly just with a glance because I recently got my hands on it as well. It's really a great book. If you're looking to read something about building products that keep bringing customers back, it's worth a read. Anyway, so as I sat down in my seat, he politely asked me in his baritone voice if I were an accountant. I was kind of puzzled with that question, but then I realized that my Deloitte hoodie would have given him that impression. I obviously said no, and I told him that I'm a consultant. And his next question was probably natural enough. He said, "What do you do?" And I told him that, I advise my clients, mainly retail executives, at the intersection of retail and AI. And I'm not kidding you, his eyes visibly lit up. But his next question had me a little bit more confused. He asked me, how long have I been doing that for? As I sat down, I was fastening my seatbelt. I said, since 2015 or so. He smiled and told me the reason for his question. He said he wanted to know if I were the real deal and not one of those several people he keeps meeting often these days who claim to be experts in AI space because, well, it's the latest buzzword right now, but who haven't had much experience with AI until 2023. I smiled back and I said, well, even though I've been working in this space since 2015, I still don't consider myself an expert, even now, especially because of the evolution and, the pace of change in this space. I kind of said, I consider myself more of a student of retail AI intersection, who is in the profession of helping retail companies figure out the what, the why, the how, and the when around AI and generative AI. And that was pretty much my introduction to him. And at that point, he introduced himself. He said he's one of the board of directors for a retail company in the US. He told me his name. I obviously didn't know of his name, but I know of the company. And you know what? It's not just any other retail company. It's one of the top 5 retailers in the US. It's big. Well, for the work I do, the people I interact with, the clients I have, it is really big. Now, for this podcast, I made a very conscious decision of not revealing the company's name or his name because I don't think it's the right thing for me to do. But I do want to share the remaining experience with you all. So, in my mind, I was still coming to terms with the idea of being seated next to one of the topmost retail executives in the country, a retail titan actually, when suddenly the flight attendant appeared with water and champagne. I asked for champagne, took a sip, and settled down in my seat further. After a couple of minutes, I think I took my phone out to put it on airplane mode. I asked him, if you don't mind, what is your role specifically on the board? And what does it really entail? He said, I don't mind it at all. And then he went into, some details about what he does, gave me some examples of his responsibilities on the board. He shared his perspectives on inflation, labor market, geopolitical situations, among a few other topics. Somewhere in the middle of that, though, he said he and his board members have been finding it more and more challenging to advise the C-suite leaders of the company on the topic of AI, and particularly generative AI. He said, ever since ChatGPT was launched and AI became democratized in the hands of consumers, the expectations of retailers have dramatically skyrocketed. He said his C-suite is looking to firm up a long-term and sustainable winning strategy for generative AI, but they keep looking at the board members for answers. They keep looking at the board members for validation. Honestly, I found it quite fascinating because that's so contrary to my previous experience of speaking and working with board members at other retailers. Typically, C-suite leaders firm up strategies, make decisions, and show results to the board members. And here I was, hearing something exactly opposite. But I guess that's the impact of generative AI as a transformational capability. Even the most experienced retail executives are looking for answers, for validation, for direction before making those critical decisions. And so I just kept listening. He said he had read articles, attended webinars, even hired an independent consulting firm to help him out. But so far, he wasn't really satisfied with the outcomes. That flight from New York to Portland is really a long one. So in the beginning, we kept talking for at least a couple of hours. We spoke on several topics. We spoke about his background and mine, our professional journeys, leadership styles, challenging status quo, impact of generative AI in general and retail, and about potential future of retail as we know it. And he was very, very open about all these topics. Somewhere in the middle of our conversation, I asked him, why is it important for him and his board to have answers for his C-suite on the topic of generative AI? He looked puzzled and asked me what I meant. I said, why is he and his board looking to show the right direction to his leadership team? Is that the only way? I asked him. He said, yes, because that's the job of the board. He said they've pretty much acted as the brain of the company in the past. They've made big decisions for the company and set directions for the future. He said he considers his team of board of directors as guardians of the company's and shareholders' interests. And he doesn't see any other way, other than showing the right way to the C-suite leaders. I said, what if it's time to try something different in his boardroom? What if this time the board asks the right questions, and asks the C-suite leaders to find answers to those? I think he found that thought very intriguing, and it was quite visible on his face. He turned a little bit more towards me and asked me to go on. I said, what if you ask, let's say, five questions to your board, the 5 right questions? He said, I know I'm getting free consulting from Deloitte right now, and I'm not going to say no to it. We both chuckled at that, but soon after that, he said, What do you think those 5 questions are? At that point, I grabbed the napkin in front of me and started jotting down a few things from our conversation so far. Spent the next few minutes to get more clarifications on a couple of topics and created a list of 5 questions for him. Walked him through each one of these 5 questions and the intent and specific rationale behind each one of them. Once I was done, he took out his phone and started typing the questions verbatim in an email. As he pushed send, he said, "There you go. I just sent the question to three other board members, and I know they're going to love it. They may have their edits, but I think we made a solid start here." In my head, I thought this was the shortest consulting gig that I've ever had in my career. And even though it was free consulting, it was one of my most satisfying ones. It took me back to the case interviewing days, back to the days when we used to practice solving cases on the back of a napkin. In this case, quite literally as well. For me, it was a fascinating experience overall. We continued our conversation even after that and, on several topics, but this was the highest point of my chance encounter with this industry expert. Even later that evening, this meeting kept playing in my head. I kept thinking about what well-functioning boards must focus on in this age of human and AI collaboration. Some people would argue that the most critical responsibility of a well-functioning board is to keep the CEO and the C-suite on their toes. Well, obviously not in an adversarial manner, but in a more constructive way. Basically, making sure that the CEO and their team know what they're doing. What this meeting highlighted to me was that there are board members out there who are seemingly finding it challenging to support their CEOs, especially on the topic of generative AI. And there must be C-suite executives who are on the other end of that equation, who are basically grappling with what's important for their board on this topic. The reason for that could be one of many, or maybe more than one. It could be that generative AI is relatively a newer topic, or that ever-evolving landscape of GenAI leaves board members grapple with the changing dynamics at a rapid speed. It could be that evolution, or change for that matter, is difficult to adopt for some leaders, or it could be that they lack the technical understanding to fully appreciate the potential of generative AI. It might also be that implications of generative AI for business models are not completely understood, or they have concerns about ethical considerations and potential risks tied to its use. Regardless of the reasons, it is crucial, absolutely vital, for board members and C-suite executives to understand each other, align with each other on what's crucial for their organization to succeed in the realm of emerging technologies such as generative AI. It is absolutely vital for the organizations to have competitive edge, future growth, and sustainable future. Look, one thing is for sure. In not so distant future, the difference between leaders and laggards will start becoming quite evident. When Walmarts and Coca-Colas of the world adopt generative AI at scale and reap the benefits of this capability, while their peers, or should I say competitors, continue to fight the territorial battle of who owns generative AI within their company, or what should their generative AI strategy be, the difference is bound to become more and more visible. All right, now coming back to the 5 questions that I wrote on the back of that Delta napkin. Let me walk you through each of those one by one. The first question was, how will generative AI affect retail industry and our company in the short and longer term? This question deals with the overall strategy of a retail company relative to what's transpiring in the retail industry and in the market in general, both from from both short-term and long-term perspectives. Boards play a crucial role in ensuring that the CEO and the leadership team have a clear and well-defined roadmap for short and long-term success. This kind of probing encourages strategic thinking and ensures that everyone's rowing in the same direction. The second question was, how are we planning to oversee and govern the company's progress with generative AI at scale? Governance and oversight are key to successful GenAI implementations. This involves prioritizing the right areas, the right use cases within the organization, and ensuring their alignment with the overall business strategy and objectives, setting clear goals and KPIs for generative AI initiatives, and tracking their progress and more importantly, value realization. More often than not, the limited success of AI and generative AI initiatives is due to lack of tracking of realized value. If you can't show and prove the success of generative AI initiative within your organization, it gets limited to being an experimentation exercise and doesn't go anywhere beyond that. Effective governance also requires mechanisms for accountability and transparency. For instance, there should be clear responsibilities for generative AI outcomes and processes for auditing and explaining generative AI decisions. Having a strong governance framework helps ensure that generative AI is used effectively and ethically, and that companies' investment in generative AI delivers the intended results. So that was the second one. The third one was, how are we balancing value creation with risk management? While generative AI holds vast potential for value creation, both on top line and bottom line, it also brings new risks that need to be managed. These include ethical risks, AI generating inappropriate or biased content. Security risks, things like AI being manipulated for malicious purposes. And operational risks, things like AI making inaccurate predictions or decisions. Balancing value creation with risk management is about ensuring that the adoption of generative AI is responsible and sustainable. It requires robust risk assessment and management frameworks, clear ethical guidelines, and strong cybersecurity measures. This balance is essential for protecting the company's reputation, legal standing, and financial health, while also maximizing the benefits of AI. Coming to the fourth question, it was, do we have the necessary talent and technology capabilities to drive meaningful impact for our shareholders, customers, and employees? Talent and technology are the two critical pillars for an organization to deliver on its generative AI ambitions. Talent refers to the skills and expertise needed to develop, implement, and manage generative AI solutions at scale. It includes not just technical skills, but also business, ethical, and legal expertise. Technology, on the other hand, refers to the hardware, software, and data infrastructure needed for generative AI, including not only cutting-edge GenAI models, but also robust data management systems, reliable IT infrastructure, and focus on UX. Having strong talent and technology capabilities is crucial for driving value from generative AI. And if an organization doesn't have these capabilities in-house, the natural question is who your trusted journey partners are to help you develop and sustain effective generative AI solutions at scale and help you leverage generative AI for strategic advantage. Boards need the CEOs to be able to answer that question. And finally, my last question was, what cultural changes do we need to bring about in order to succeed with generative AI? Cultural change is one of the most challenging aspects of generative AI adoption, but also the most important one. It involves fostering a culture of innovation, learning, and agility, where experimenting with generative AI is encouraged and failure is seen as a learning opportunity. It also involves cultivating a culture of ethics and responsibility, where the implications of generative AI are considered and addressed proactively. But more importantly, it involves creating a culture of collaboration and cross-functional integration, where generative AI is not seen as a sole responsibility of a CIO or a CTO, but as a transformational capability to rethink the future business models that everyone should be responsible for. Boards must be interested in bringing about this sort of cultural shift for maximizing the benefits of generative AI and ensuring its acceptance and adoption across the organization. And that, everyone, was what resonated with this industry titan tremendously. For me, it was a fascinating flight. What started off as a routine flight turned out to be one of the most extraordinary conversations I've ever had with anyone on an airport or on a flight. So next time, if you find yourself on a flight or in a similar setting, don't shy away from striking up a conversation with the person next to you. Who knows, you might just find yourself in a company of a leader, a visionary, or an industry expert ready to share their wealth of knowledge and listen to your insights. And on that note, it's a wrap on this episode. Thanks for listening. Here's me, Saurabh, signing off. If you like the content, don't forget to follow this show to keep learning a thing or two about retail AI. You can follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to this show on Spotify and Apple. Join me in the next episode of The Retail Tales, a show which is exclusively focused on exploring all things AI across the retail value chain. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay curious.